Okay, the reading for this week is Matsuo Bashō's Ichinaka wa, Out in the Streets, composed in 1690. And the study guide I have for you all is the text, the original Japanese text, an English translation by Stephen Carter from his book Traditional Japanese Poetry and Anthology, 1991. I have the link to that below in the study guide, and my study guide questions for you all. Okay, so there's a lot to get through in this lecture video, so I'm going to move as quickly as possible. I have the link to the original Japanese, which appears in your study guide, and I took that from Nihon Koten Bungaku Zenshu 32, the Renga Haikai Shu. It's published in 1974. I have some other recommended reading on the study guide. You can look at those as well, and the link is provided. Okay, moving quickly along. We'll start with the relevant terms, eras, names, and titles. Starting with Haikai Renga, which we've already discussed in another video, but I'll review it very quickly here. Haikai Renga. Renga, of course, is linked verse. Ren, ka, ren no uta, tsude naru uta. Haikai Renga is non-standard Renga, derived from previous Renga, so traditional Renga of the medieval period. Haikai Renga is an extension of that, or a derivation of that. It became a serious art form with the evolution of three schools. Teimon, school of Matsunaga Teitoka, was the first Haikai Renga school. Then this was followed by a sort of lighter, humorous, kind of frivolous reaction to that, to his highbrow style, called the Dandin-fu, right, or the Dandin school, which was led by Nishiyama Soin. And then finally the Shofu, or Matsuo芭蕉school, led by Matsuo芭蕉, okay, who's kind of a synthesis of these two previous schools. Okay, Haikai Renga is characterized by a rough Haikai spirit, or Hai is the word that's often used, that embraced parody and occasional vulgarity, that combined disparate elements, and that fused classical forms with everyday contemporary reality. In his book on Matsuo芭蕉, Haro Shirane, who's the sort of leading Anglophone scholar of Matsuo芭蕉and Haikai in general, explains how a single line of Haikai poetry was traditionally appreciated in four modes, or four contexts simultaneously. The four contexts were in isolation, right? So just reading a single verse by itself without any reference to what surrounds it. The second is in relation to the previous verse. Okay, so there's a tendency in traditional Haikai, or traditional Renga rather, to read Renga in pairs of the verse and then the verse that follows, and then that verse and the verse that follows, and so forth. And three, as a shift away from or recontextualization of the penultimate verse, which is called the uchikoshi. And four, as part of the flow and mood of the larger sequence. Okay, so in traditional Renga, this was kind of shunned upon, to sort of extract a narrative or a story out of the entire sequence. However, in Haikai Renga, the non-standard, unorthodox style of Matsuo芭蕉especially, we see this more flexibility, more freedom, and a more willingness to read each verse in the context of the larger story, as it were. Okay, so I have some study questions about this larger story aspect. We'll discuss those later. This fact, okay, not this fact, as Shirane notes, only the first mode, the reading the stanza in isolation, survived into the modern period. So of the four modes, the four traditional reading modes, only the first mode, reading the stanza in isolation, survived in the modern period. The other three went into disuse. This fact is evidenced in Masaoka Shiki's invention of modern haiku, a modern term derived from hokku, of the first line of a sequence in the Meiji period. So Masaoka Shiki is a great poet of the Meiji period, and he sort of said, get rid of haikai altogether, let's just read each stanza by itself as an individual hokku, which later became called haiku, right? Which everyone knows today. Alright, moving on. Dai. What is the dai? This is a key word in haikai and in Renga in general. In classical Japanese waka as well. It means topics, In waka, Japanese poetry, it refers to the classification. The dai is used to classify poems. The chief dai are the 4 seasons, beginning with spring, haru, natsu, aki, fuyu. Next in importance is love or eros, koi, right? This is not agape love, this is eros love, romantic love between male and female usually. Waka collections typically include other topics too, such as, so these are the other major dai, tabi, travel, aisho, laments, banka, elegies, jukkai, grievances, ganouta, felicitations, shakkyo, Buddhism related poems, jingi, or Shinto related poems, and wakare no uta are parting poems. So those are the major dai, and some of those, a lot of them were shed, but some of them survived into the Gendoku era of Matsuo芭蕉, and Matsuo芭蕉employs some of these, which we'll see in the poem today. Gendoku era, alright, I just mentioned that Matsuo芭蕉lived and flourished during the Gendoku era. What is the Gendoku era? It's the period from 1688 to 1704, corresponding approximately to the reign of the 5th shogun, Tokugawa Tsunayoshi. The period had no internal conflict. Obviously, during the Edo period, there was no war inside of Japan, so the government was able to focus on reorganizing the economy. The urban merchant class, or the chonin, became wealthy and influential in most areas, giving rise to the rich and sumptuous Gendoku Bunka. Alright, so the culture of the Gendoku era is often called the Gendoku Bunka, or Gendoku culture, which is characterized by the following. The great active epoch of geisha and the artists who celebrated them, flourishing in all cultural areas. In literature, we see Saikaku and his popular floating world prose, or ukiyo-zoshi. In Joruri puppet theater, we see Chikamatsu's dramas, which we've already discussed in another assignment and video. In poetry, we of course see Matsuo芭蕉and his Haikai Denga, and his Haibun prose, which we've also discussed. In painting, we see the Kano and Tosa schools of art, of painting, right? So these are the 2 major schools of painting that began in the Gendoku period and continued through the Edo period. In the decorative arts, we see the works of Ogata Korin, who's also one of the great artists of the Edo period. We see, of course, ukiyo-e prints evolved into a high art, although ukiyo-e prints are really a sort of later genre of the late Edo period. We see Neo-Confucian sinologists and Kokugaku nativist scholars. So the Kokugaku scholars are the ones who focused on the Japanese classics. Neo-Confucian sinologists, of course, focus on classical Chinese poetry and classical Chinese Confucian thought and so forth. They came into prominence in this Gendoku era as well. In the ruling classes, we see no drama regain popularity. Okay, no drama, of course, is the form that we discussed in the last video with Zeami's play, and that originated in the medieval period but regained popularity in the Gendoku period, while kabuki theater was favored by the chonin. Okay, so it's just a brief description of Gendoku era, adapted from Frederick's Japan Encyclopedia, as I have there on the note. Next key term is kasen. Okay, so the work we're reading today is an example of this literary genre called the kasen. What is kasen? Kasen, literally, it means splendid immortals, okay, or poetic immortals. And the term originally referred to eminent court poets of the past, but it came to be used to refer to the 36 great haikai poets in the lineage of Bashō. Okay, so the 36 poets that Bashō considered to be the great haikai poets of the past. And the word came to be used from the practice of creating an ideal groups of 36 artistic forebears. Okay, we don't need to worry too much about the derivation or the origins of the word. What is important is kasen as a form, and as a form it is a kind of renga that consists of 36 verse sequences. Okay, so the work we're reading today, Ichinaka wa, has 36 verses in it. Okay, the form adheres to rules, but has much more freedom allowed. Okay, it incorporates common elements. Matsuo芭蕉was involved in hundreds of kasen, so this isn't the only one that he wrote. He was involved in hundreds of them. the form predates Bashō. Okay, so Kasen, he didn't invent Kasho, but he refined and popularized the form and sort of perfected the form, so that whenever you hear people talk about Kasen today, they usually have Matsuo Bashō's Kasen in mind. Before the 1650s, most sequences were 100 verses. Okay, most Renga sequence or Haikai Renga sequence were 100 verses, hyakuin, those are called, or 50 verses, those are called gozuin. Okay, but by the time of Bashō's death, the 36-verse Kasen dominated. Okay. Next term is very important, karumi. Word comes up a lot when you're reading studies about Matsuo Bashō, especially his later works. This refers to Bashō's so-called light style, which he developed after his return to Edo following his Oku no Hosomichi journey. And we read Oku no Hosomichi, one of the other assignments. We have a video on that. You can review that. So he went up into the northern regions of Japan, came back, and after that he developed his famous light style, or the karumi style, according to Kerkham. And I should note that Eleanor Kirkham's Matsuo Bashō's Poetic Spaces, Exploring Haikai Intersections, published in 2006, is one of the major studies on Matsuo Bashō's Haikai, and I highly recommend it to anyone interested in the subject. But according to Kirkham, where were we? Here we are. According to Kirkham, karumi is, and I quote, a principle that accepted life as it is. Okay, so this is the sort of definition of karumi. A principle that accepts life as it is, that practiced non-contrivance, so the kind of Taoist elements, right? The idea of non-contrivance is a very Taoist idea of just conforming to the world as it is, or nature. Reflecting the rhythm of the mind is also important to the idea of karumi, as is in verse. And that karumi also attempted to discover poetry in the mundane, everyday things in life through common words. Alright? Okay, so in earlier Matsuo Bashō we see lots of allusions to the past in canonical poems and so forth, and we still see some of that in his later works, but not to the same extent. The focus is turned toward mundane, every things in life and use of common words. This approach to poetry is not only reflected in his hokku, but also in his linked verse compositions. Alright, next key term is shofu. Shofu is the Bashō style. The kanji for Shō is the Shō of Bashō, and it simply means the Bashō style, which Bashō established his true literary style after his Oku no Hosomichi journey in 1689. So he returns to Edo and develops this style that emphasizes karumi. So this period of this final stage of his career is often referred to as his karumi period, from the time of Hisago, the collection Hisago 1690, and Sadumino, his great anthology of haikai poetry in 1691, The Monkey's Straw Raincoat, until his collection Sumidawara in 1694. That's charcoal stack. Okay, so shofu is a word that you see a lot in Bashō studies, and it refers to the Bashō school, basically. And that school came to prominence at the end of his career. That's all you have to remember. Okay, moving on. Ichinaka wa. This is the work we're reading today. It's out in the streets, is the translation. This is a kasen composed near Kyoto in the summer of 1690 by Bashō and his two students, Nozawa Boncho, and I have notes about them below, and Mukai Kyōdai. Okay, so this kasen was composed by the three of them, with Matsuo芭蕉leading, and his two disciples, Nozawa Boncho, referred to as Boncho hereafter, and Mukai Kyōdai, referred to as Kyōdai hereafter, following his lead. Okay, and the work was included in his great masterpiece, the Sadumino, Monkey's Straw Raincoat, 1691, as I just mentioned, which is considered Ichinaka wa is considered a masterpiece of the form, showcasing Bashō's final karumi style. Okay, next is my note about Sadumino, which is often considered the magnum opus of the Bashō school. It is one of the 7 major anthologies of Bashō, the Bashō Shichibu Shu. It contains 4 Kadumi-infused kasen, as well as some 400 hoku collected by Boncho and Kyorai under Bashō's supervision. Along with Hisago, the anthology, it is considered to display Bashō's mature style, the Shofu style, at its peak. When he sat with Boncho, Okada, Yasui, and Kyorai at Yoshinaka Temple to write Kirigisa, he extolled them, "Let's squeeze the juice from our bones." Okay, so this is a little episode that is often mentioned in descriptions of Sada Mino. Next, the key term is kaishi. Okay, written with the kanji for futokoro, and kami, kaishi. Standard poem writing sheets. So these are the kind of fancy, beautiful pieces of paper on which the kasen are written. And usually there are 2 sheets used in a 36-verse sequence kasen. Okay. Next are the key terms that appear inside the poem on the 2 pieces of paper, on the 2 sheets. And the first is Shō no omote. This is the front of the first sheet. It records the title, any foreword that might be there, plus the 6 verses of the preface, or jo. Okay, so jo, ha, kyu are terms I will discuss below. Just remember that the Shō no omote is the first sheet, the front of the first sheet. The back of the first sheet is the Shō no ura. This is the back of the first sheet. It carries the first 12 verses of the development movement, or the ha. Okay, so jo, ha, kyu. The ha is the development movement, and it usually has a ha 1 and a ha 2. I'll explain that below too. The next sheet is called the Nagori no omote. The front of the next sheet is the Nagori no omote. The front of the second sheet, it holds the further 12 verses of the ha section. Okay, so the second ha section is on the Nagori no omote, or the front of the second sheet. And the back of the second sheet is the Nagori no ura. This contains the final Q section, along with a record of whoever participated in the session, the location, and the date of composition. Okay? And the Q is the last section, the Joha Q, which I'll explain now. Joha Q, this is a very important word that I've already introduced in one of the other videos. It's a musical or dance pattern with a slow, measured beginning, that's the Jo, followed by an increasing tempo and intensity, that's the Ha section, to a climax, that's the Q. The Q is the climax, okay, which is a short, quick-paced conclusion. Jo Ha Q, and as I mentioned, Jo Ha Q is a traditional sort of structure that informs a lot of Japanese art and literature and so forth, but it continues through the present, so even modern and contemporary writers sort of unconsciously write works that conform to this Jo Ha Q structure. A lot of times you find it, you sense it. Alright, in a kasen, the Jo is the first section. That's verses 1 to 6. The Ha, as I mentioned, can be divided into 2 parts, the Ha 1 and Ha 2. Ha 1 is verses 7 to 18. Ha 2 is verses 19 to 30. And in Bashō's work, the Ha 2 section often is a bit more swifter, more dynamic, more challenging, and more intense than the Ha 1 section. Okay, that's in Bashō's work. You see this sort of distinction between Ha 1 and Ha 2. In other kasen poets, you don't see that distinction made so clearly. And the Q is the final section, the final 6 poems, 6 verses, verses 31 to 36. Okay, moving on. The seasons now. In most kasen, the seasonal verse to the non-seasonal verse ratio is 5 to 5. Okay, so half of the verses in a 36-verse sequence are seasonal verses, any of the 4 seasons. The other half are miscellaneous or non-season verses. Okay, the spring and autumn to summer and winter ratio, however, is 5 to 3. Okay, so remember in Japanese culture in general, spring and autumn, right, haru and aki, are the most important seasons. Summer and winter appear in Japanese art, of course, but not so prominently, right? The focus is usually on spring and autumn. these are sort of the most meaningful seasons in the context of traditional Japanese culture. So we see in Kasen that is reflected as well with this ratio of 5 to 3. Spring and autumn verses typically appear in threes. Okay, so when you see a spring verse appear, it doesn't usually switch immediately to the next season or to a non-season. Rather, it continues for threes, right? With a max of 4 or 5 in the Edo period. Sometimes it'll continue up to 5 in a row. But usually it's 3. And the same with autumn. Autumn verses usually appear in a sequence of 3. Summer and winter likewise appear in pairs or by themselves with a max of 3. Okay, so they're not emphasized as much, so they appear either once or twice, usually. A series of season verses will often cross the boundary between one side of a writing sheet and the next sheet, or a transition between sheets. Okay, so just because you flip the page over doesn't mean that we're entering a different season or a non-season. Often they continue through the page break. Okay, moving on. Hana no za is a key term. Okay, there are 2 zas, the hana no za and the tsuki no za. And I'll explain those right now. Hana no za is the place or the seat, literally, of spring blossoms. Hana, remember, usually refers to either cherry blossoms or plum blossoms. In most cases, that general rule applies here as well. Okay, so it's the place or seat of spring blossoms, specifically plum blossoms or cherry blossoms. All right. And what is a hana no za? This is the fixed topic of spring blossoms that appears twice in the kasen. Okay, where does it appear? It appears first as the penultimate verse on the back of the first sheet. So verse number 17. I have that emboldened there. So you remember it. The first hana no za is verse number 17. And the second is the penultimate verse of the entire sequence. So at the very end of the penultimate verse, namely verse 35, we usually see the hana no za there as well. So there'd be a reference or an inclusion of the word hana or an image related to hana. Very rarely the hana no za is brought forward or delayed. Okay. However, we might see an exception here with Ichinaka wa. So look at verses number 17, look at verse number 35, and see whether the hana no za actually appears. There might be an exception. We'll have to check that later. The second type of za is the tsuki no za, the place or seat of the moon. Okay, so the moon makes 3 appearances in a kasen. First as the penultimate verse of the Jo preface, namely verse 5. Okay, that's emboldened there, so check verse 5 in the kasen, in the assigned kasen. Second, it appears at or around the 7th position on the back of the first sheet, namely verse 13. So we'll have to check verse 13 when we read the kasen. And third, as the penultimate verse on the front of the second sheet, namely verse 29. So 5, 13, and 29. These are the 3 positions where the tsuki no za usually, but not always, appears. 2 of the moons, the Jo moon and the Ha-1 moon, or the first 2 moons namely, are also invariably set against autumn. Okay, so moons tsuki no za 1 and tsuki no za 2 are usually set against in an autumn context. The 3rd moon, however, takes a different season, generally summer or winter, and may be relatively underplayed. Okay, so the first 2 are the more prominent ones. They're emphasized. And the 3rd one might be underplayed. Unlike blossom verses, the moon positions more often shift, especially the one in verse 13, the middle one. Okay, so the rules about tsuki no za are not as strict as the rules about the hana no za. Keep that in mind as you read this kasen and others. Alright, next is koi, or love, erotic love. This is another fixed topic, or a dai, which I defined above. This is a fixed topic. One of the fixed topics to have survived from earlier traditional Renga-linked poetry. The koi topic typically appears as a pair or as a trio of verses in the middle of the longer ha sections. So you don't see a koi string of verses in the Jo, introduction, or in the Q at the end. You usually see it in the middle, longer ha sections. And it usually appears not just by itself, but in a sequence of 2 or 3. Bashō tended to treat love rather freely, so this is important to keep in mind. You read Bashō's kasen and you look for the koi sequence, but sometimes you can't find it because it's so subtle. So Bashō tended to treat love rather freely, whereas other poets often mirror the emotions inherited from the classics. Okay, so Bashō had sort of a freer or a more modern understanding of this idea of koi, whereas others conformed more closely to the classics and would write about love themes that were specifically from the Kokinshu, the Shin Kokinshu, and so forth. A love sequence may follow a koi no yobidashi, verse that indirectly sets up the subject. Okay, so the verse preceding the koi verse is often sort of a koi no yobidashi, as it's called, which literally means love calling, right? Love beckoning. Alright, so so keep in mind this koi motif and try to find it in the kasen that we're reading today. Next key term, hokku. This is, of course, something I've already introduced, and this is the opening stanza of a renga chain, the first stanza. It sets the stage for the entire work. In traditional renga, it must include kigo, a seasonal word, and kireji. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's the rule that applies to earlier traditional renga, but do we find it here in Bashō's kasen? You can look for that in the first verse. This hokku became the basis for modern haiku. Okay, so in the modern period, the word hokku gets sort of transformed to haiku. Wakiku is the second stanza of a renga chain. So verse 2 is called the wakiku. The daisan no ku is the third stanza of the renga chain. And the ageku is the final verse of the sequence. So in a kasen, that would be number 36, right? Okay, and the ageku should relate back to the original hokku. So there's kind of dynamic or dialectic relation between the first hokku and the final ageku. They sort of speak to each other, as it were. Usually ends with a kireji, or a cutting word, as did the hokku. And kireji, cutting word, what is this? I've defined this already elsewhere, but we'll review it here. It gives structural support to the verse. It divides the particular and the whole. When the kireji appears at the end of a verse, it provides closure, drawing the reader back to the beginning and initiating a circular pattern. When it appears in the middle of a verse, it serves as a pause that cuts the verse into two independent thoughts, giving emotional emphasis to preceding words. There are 18 standard kireji. I'm not going to read them all here, but you can review that. It's on your study guide here. Ka, ya, kanagana, mogana, zo, ka, ya, yo, keri, and so forth. Okay, review that so you know how to identify a kireji when you see it. Okay, and the final cluster of terms here are the kinds of links. Okay, the links are the tsuke. Okay, note that all links can be divided into two sort of broader categories of the shinku, the closely related links, and the soku, or the remotely related links. Alright, what are we talking about links? We're talking about the link between one verse and the verse that follows. Okay, so how are these two verses, for example, verse number 6 and verse number 7 in a kasen, how are they related? This is the question of links, right? Some are very closely related, and by closely I mean obviously related, so it's absolutely apparent how what the connecting factor is between the two verses. In other verse sequences of two, or verse pairs, the relation or the link is not so obvious, right? And those are the soku, or the remotely related links. Okay, so Matsuo芭蕉in his Bashō school privileged the latter. Okay, they found soku, or remotely related links, to be more interesting than the obvious ones, right? Okay, and now what are the types of tsuke? These are words that often appear in studies of Matsuo Bashō's poetry. The most important in the context of Matsuo Bashō's poetry is the nioi tsuke, the scent link, right? This is more subtle, indirect, associative, thematic. Okay, it allows for a separation of scenes, which is preferred, and it's the preferred tsuke of Matsuo Bashō. What do I mean by separation of scenes? you might have one verse and then the verse that follows. In traditional Renga poetry, they would be the same scene. So a mountain village, for example, or a hut somewhere. And the scene would generally be the same setting. However, in Matsuo芭蕉, he'll suddenly shift the setting from an urban setting, for example, in a city, to something completely unrelated elsewhere. Okay, so that's Matsuo Basho's idea of this nioi zuke allows for a sudden shift of setting or scenes. Okay, what are the other kinds of zuke? We have the kotoba zuke, which is word links, so direct, and this is a more straightforward or direct method of linguistic linking. Okay, so we still find this in Matsuo芭蕉, but he was not as fond of this as he was of nioi zuke, which is more subtle. Kokoro zuke are the content links. Okay, linking through content, not necessarily the words or the linguistic, the diction and so forth, but content links are called, kokoro zuke. The nioi zuke, for some reason I have that twice here, I should erase one of them. Linking by fragrance, nioi, i.e. poetical overtones. Okay, so combine that with the nioi zuke above. Kurai zuke is another kind. These are the rank links, the linking by revealing the social rank or the station of, say, a character in the, or a persona in the stanza, in the verse. Suiryo zuke are guessing links, linking by surmise. And omokage zuke, which are linking by, which is a method of linking by suggested allusion to a precursor poem or text. Okay. So this is kind of intertextuality, you might say, the omokage zuke. Alright, moving on. The participants in Ichinaka wa. There are three, as I mentioned above, Matsuo芭蕉and his two disciples, Boncho and Kyōrai. Okay, Matsuo芭蕉, you can read the short description there. We already know enough about him. I don't need to review that. Boncho, haikai poet, and one of Matsuo Basho's leading disciples, born in Kanazawa, spent most of his life in Kyoto working as a doctor. Together with Kyōrai, he edited the Matsuo Basho school's masterpiece, the Sadumino, anthology of 1689, I should say 91, I think. He participated in numerous renku with Bashō and other Shōmon members. Okay, and a similar description for Kyōrai below. You can read that on your own. Next, we have the study questions. So I'm going to read these, and then we'll move on to the poem, to the kasen. Okay, study questions to answer after we read the story, and you can submit this as your homework. Kirk Ham, whose book I mentioned above, extracts a narrative from the first 7 stanzas. Okay, so she does kind of a close reading of the first 7 stanzas of the kasen Ichinaka wa, and she makes a story out of it, or she doesn't make it, she finds it there in the stanzas, and she sort of articulates it. And this is something that was prohibited in traditional Renga, but was probably intended by Bashō and his disciples. So they're more aware of the possibilities of narrative and story, and of allowing for narrative and story in their sequences. And she writes the following summary of the first 7 stanzas, and I quote. Okay, and the question, the assignment for you to do is to continue what she begins and take this story and follow it all the way to the end of the kasen, to the 36th verse. Okay, so she starts off, she starts the summary for you, writing, "The sequence begins with a summer moon above the city. While the smell of the streets suggests the heat, the moon provides a sense of coolness, although this only serves to underscore the heat that everyone breathlessly complains about at the entrance of their dwellings. The heat extends predictably from an urban setting to a rural one, where farmers indicate that the rice is sprouting even before the second weeding, a sign that the summer is hotter than usual. As these farmers work, pulling the unnecessary weeds around the rice, they eat a modest lunch of one dried sardine, brushing off the ashes that have collected on it. A wandering samurai is upset that he cannot buy any food here, as the farmers will not accept his money, or as Dazai Osama suggests, and she, in her book, she discusses Dazai Osama's reading of this kasen. As Dazai Osama suggests, a tired farmer complains about his lot in life, that he has no money, and this man, whether samurai or farmer, is an awkward one at that, wearing a long sword on his side that is completely disproportionate perhaps to his height or build, but more likely his station in life, for the disproportion between man and his sword is highlighted when he reveals that he is easily frightened by a frog croaking or jumping in the tall grass in the evening dusk. Okay, so the question or the assignment is to continue what she has started, summarizing the story up through the concluding Ageku, verse 36. Okay, and obviously there's enough ambiguity and sort of blanks in the, or gaps in the narrative, in the story, to render a completely different story for each student. So one student will come up with a certain story, another will come up with one that is similar but has divergencies as well. Alright, number 2, how does Ichinaka wa conform to the standard kasen format, especially the summer beginning type? Remember that I have a chart below, we'll go over that later, but the chart shows that some kasen begin in spring, some begin in summer, some begin in autumn, and others begin in winter. And the one we're reading today happens to begin in summer. Okay, so there's a certain format for kasen that begin in summer. The question here is, to what extent does Ichinaka wa conform to the standard format? How does it depart from the standard template? Explain using the chart provided below. Question number 2. How does Ichinaka wa conform to the standard kasen form? Oh, that's what I just read. Question number 3. Check to see if Ichinaka wa conforms to the standard template with regard to the tsuki no za, the place or seat of the moon. Explain. Okay, so look at the chart. Notice or look at my explanation of the tsuki no za motif and see if this kasen conforms to the standard rule. And question number 4, do the same but with the hana no za. Check to see if Ichinaka wa conforms to the standard template with regard to the hana no za, the place or seat of spring blossoms. Number 5, and remember there's more room for flexibility with the blossom, hana no za, seat. And number 5, the final question, describe the various kinds of links that are used in the work. Okay, so review my list of link types that I just explained and describe the ones that you find in the work. Are there more shinku, remotely related links, or are there more soku, closely related links? That should be the other way around. I need to fix that. Are there more shinku, closely related links, or soku, remotely related links? Can you find any examples of the nyoizuke? Can you find any examples of the kotobazuke? Any examples of the kokorozuke? Any kuraizuke? Any suiryozuke, the surmise or guessing links? Any omokagezuke, which is the intertextual one, right? The ones that allude to past works of poetry. Explain. Okay, so those are the 5 questions. There are not a lot of questions, but they require that you write quite a bit, especially for the summary of the entire story. Okay, now moving on finally to the actual work. Ichinaka wa no maki, out in the streets. And the English translation I use is by Stephen Carter, and I have the link at the beginning of this study guide to his excellent book, which anyone interested in this subject should purchase. Alright, sheet 1, the front of sheet 1, called the Shoori no Omote, as I mentioned above. Okay, we'll start with the front of sheet 1, start with the hokku. Ichinaka wa mono no nioi ya natsu no tsuki. And this is by Boncho. And translation by Carter is, out in the streets are smells of every sort and the summer moon. Okay, verse 2, the wakiku. And this is by Matsuo芭蕉. Okay, so note that Matsuo芭蕉does not begin the work. He writes the wakiku. Atsushi atsushi to kado kado no koe. It's hot. Oh, but it's hot. Voices say at every gate. Okay. And note, of course, this is an obvious point you probably are aware of by now, but the alternating sequences are 5-7-5, followed by 7-7, followed by 5-7-5, followed by 7-7. So the hokku, the first poem, the first verse in the work is 575. Ichinaka wa mono no niyoi ya natsu no tsuki. 575, followed by the wakiku, which is 77. Atsushi atsushi to kado kado no koe. Right? So the next will be again 575, and this is by Kyorai, his other disciple. It's called, verse 3 is called the Dai-san. Niban kusa, tori mo hatasazu, ho ni idete. Second wedding, not done yet, and already ears on the rice. And I have a note there that Carter also notes as well, and I think these original notes were from the Nihon Koten Bungakushu, or the original book that has the Chūgyaku, or the Kyakuchu in it. The Nihon Koten Bungak Taike, I should have said, is where the original text appears that I've taken, I've borrowed from that work that includes the Nihon Bungak Taike. Usually includes scholars' notes about the works, and these notes usually include explanations about the various kinds of links, and these links are provided here in your study guide, is what I wanted to say. Alright, so the link here takes the town from the previous verse and shifts it to the countryside. So we have a morphine, or a transition, or a change of place here, from the town to countryside. Okay, I'm not going to explain all the links here as we go. The links, I have little short notes beside each verse. You can read that. And one of the questions on your study guide is about the links. So you can clarify the links, the types of links, what exactly links one verse to the next verse in your answer to that question. Okay, that was number 3 I read. Number 4. Hai uchi tataku urume ichimai. This is by Boncho. No season. Alright, so you note that the season is given too, next to each verse. Verse number 1 was summer. Verse number 2 was summer. Verse number 3 was summer. And then here we have a no season, right? And the link, you can read that for yourself, how it is linked. Hai uchi tataku urume ichimai. He taps off the ashes to get at one dried sardine. Next, verse 5 by Matsuo Bashō. Kono suji wa kane mo mishirazu fujiyusa yo. Seems in these parts no one's seen a coin before. What a nuisance. And a note about the link there. Verse number 6 by Kyorai. Tada tohyoshi ni nagaki wakizashi. So a 7-7 here. So long it's ridiculous. That sword stuck in his belt. And that was another no season verse. Okay, that's the end of the front of sheet 1. Next we have the back of sheet 1, called the Shōri no Ura. Okay, verse 7 by Boncho. Kusamura ni kawazu kowagaru yu magure. From a clump of grass jumps a frog and gives a fright at nightfall. This is a spring verse. Verse number 8 is by Bashō. This is also spring, and the persona or the character in the previous verse shifts to a woman here, okay, which is evident from the fact that she is picking butterburs. Okay, so suddenly we have a shift to a woman. Fuki no me tori ni andon yuri kesu. While out picking butterburs, she swings the lamp till it's out. Verse 9. Dōshin no okori wa hana no tsubomu toki. This is by Kyorai. It's a spring verse as well. She got religion back when the cherry blossoms were only buds. Okay, religion, of course, dōshin is a Buddhist word. So by religion, Carter means Buddhism specifically, and more specifically the search for enlightenment, right? Dōshin no okori wa hana no tsubomu toki. And a note about that, the extinguished lamp is used as a sort of metaphor for satori, right? Enlightenment, nirvana. Nirvana, nehang, the Sanskrit word. Nirvana literally means the extinguishing of the flame, right? So when you've extinguished your flame, or your bonno, your passions and desires and worldly hankerings and so forth, when you've extinguished that, you have reached the stage of nirvana. So that's a common metaphor that you see in Japanese poetry a lot. Number 10. Noto no nanao no fuyu wa sami uki. Okay, Noto is Noto no kuni, right? Noto province, which corresponds to today's Ishikawa prefecture. Right, in the translation here, at Nanao in Noto, life's hard in the winter. This is a 7-7 verse by Boncho, and now suddenly it's winter. So the previous one we saw spring, we skip over summer, skip over autumn, and suddenly we're in winter. Okay, and this is the love position. I mentioned that the Koi Motif or theme often appears in verse 10 and 11 and 12. Does it appear here? You will want to ask yourself as you read this this section of the poem, of the kasen. Alright. Verse 11 now, by Matsuo Bashō. Uo no hone shiwa buru made no oi o mite. Look at me, so old. I'm down to sucking the juice from fish bones. Okay, so the previous verse was winter. Now we're in a miscellaneous verse. The season is not specified. No season. Love. Remember that whenever Matsuo Bashō addressed the theme of love, or where the love theme should be, he was often very, very subtle about it. Right? So he doesn't make any explicit references to love here, but do you sense the theme of koi anywhere inside of this verse? That's something you can ask yourself as you read. Verse number 12 is by Kyorai, 7-7 verse. Machibito ideshi komikado no kagi. He admits the one she awaits, with the key to the side gate. Okay, no season. Obviously we see love here in this one. It's pretty explicit, especially because this is an allusion to Genji Monogatari, the tale of Genji, the great Heian work of Monogatari fiction. And it's specifically an allusion to the scene where Genji is leaving his lover Suetsumu Hana on a snowy morning. Okay, so in the Genji Monogatari, Genji is leaving her. Here, he admits the one she awaits, right? So it's kind of a mirror or a reversal of what is going on in the Genji story. Number 13 by Boncho. This again is a no-season poem, right? The previous poem too was no season. The one before that was no season. So I think we have no-season poems 4 or 5 in a row here in a sequence. And this poem here by Boncho is Tachi Kakari, Byobu o Taosu, Onagodomo. Usually it's Onagodomo, but I think here it's Onagodomo. Leaning too close, I should say too close. Leaning too close, they topple the standing screen. Those serving women. Okay, a note there about the link, how this verse is connected to the one that precedes it. Read the note there and expand upon that. Number 14 by Matsuo芭蕉. Yudo no wa take no sunoko wa bishiki. A sorry bathroom this. Bamboo grating for a floor. Okay, again a no season verse. So the screen at the screen from the previous verse becomes a screen at a countryside bathing area in this. So it takes a little detail from the previous verse and transplants it in a different scene altogether, which is something that Matsuo芭蕉was fond of, as I mentioned above. Verse number 15 is by Kyodai, 575, and now we're in autumn. Okay, so that ends the no-season sequence. We're now in autumn, and Kyodai responds to Bashō's previous verse by writing the following. Ui kyou no mi o fuki otosu yu arashi. fennel berries are blown down to the ground by an evening gale. Okay, and I have a note about the connection there. You can figure out what the connection is. Verse 16 is 7 syllable verse by Boncho. So yaya samuku teda ni kaeru ka. A priest there in growing cold, going back to his temple. Okay, again, autumn, so the autumn is continuing. Remember, autumn and spring usually do not appear and then suddenly disappear, but rather continue for several verses in a row. Okay, and then verse 17, I have it underlined there. The number is underlined because the moon is supposed to appear here, right? And it does. Saru hiki no saru to you furu aki no tsuki. The aki no tsuki, Matsuo Bashō, conforms to the rule and puts in the... Oh wait, we might have to review that. This might be a blossom position poem, and instead of... Alright, I'll have to review that. The translation is, with his monkey, a monkey master roams the world with the autumn moon. Okay, so this is 17. What should come here? Should it be the hana no za or the tsuki no za? Confirm that and figure out whether it actually appears here, and whether Matsuo Bashō conforms to the rule, follows the rule. Alright, number 18 is by Kyōdai, and this is no season verse, miscellaneous. Nen ni itto no jishi hakaru nari. Once a year he pays up his one lone bale of tax. Monkey master goes to account for his income is the connection there. Alright, now that's the end of sheet 1. Now we turn to the next page, sheet 2, the second kaishi paper page, and we are on the front, which is called the Nagori no Omote. And verse 19 by Boncho is the following. Goroppon namiki tsuketaru mizu tamari. No season there. This is a miscellaneous verse. The translation is 5 or 6 logs of fresh timber thrown across mud puddles. Verse 20 by Matsuo芭蕉. Tabi fumi yogosu kuro boko no michi. 7 syllable verse, no season. Translation is a slip. And he soiled his fine socks, his tabi, in the black earth of the road. Okay, tabi signifies status. Okay, so the poor peasant would not be wearing tabi. So from the fact that he's wearing tabi, you know that this is someone of relatively high status. Number 21 by Kyōdai. Again, no season. Oitate. Hayaki o uma no katana mochi. Hurrying along behind his master's horse, a sword bearer. Okay, I have a note about the connection there. I'm not going to read the notes about the connection from this point on, so you can confirm that as you read. Let's get through this as quickly as possible. Number 22. Detsuchi ga ninau mizu koboshitari. The errand boy has spilled the water he's carrying. No season. Number 23, I have it italicized there, and because something is supposed to come here. Alright, so confirm whether the hana no za or whatever is supposed to... I'm sorry, it's italicized because the love theme is supposed to appear here. Okay, so read it and check to see if the love theme actually appears here. Remember that Matsuo Bashō is very subtle about the love theme sometimes, so it might be there under the surface. And the poem is as follows. Toshōji mo mushiro gakoi no uriyashiki. Straw mats protect the doors and sliding screens, a house for sale. Okay, number 24, 2. The koi theme or the koi motif is supposed to appear too, and it does, obviously from the word iro tsuku, right? Iro is shikido, is always related in Japanese culture, usually related in Japanese culture, to the erotic, to eros, right? It's a word for color. Iro. Tenjou mamori itsuka irozuku. This is an autumn poem. Irozuku, we see the love motif here. The translation is the peppers. Those ceiling guards turned red as the time went by. Okay, verse number 25. Koso koso to maraji o tsukuru tsuki yosashi. This is by Boncho. Again, autumn. Right, so we see autumn, it appears 3 or 4 times in a row here. Translation, without a sound, hands make straw into sandals in the moonlight. Peppers produced without labor. Okay, number 26 by Matsuo Bashō. Again, autumn. Nomi o furui ni okishi hatsuzaki. To shake out fleas, she leaves her bed in early autumn. Next is No Season verse by Kyōdai. Sono mama ni korobi ochitaru masu otoshi. Nothing caught, it's rolled onto its side, empty mousetrap. Verse number 28 by Boncho. No Season. Yugamite futa no awanu hanbitsu. So warped it no longer fits, the lid of the old wood chest. Verse number 29, and I have it emboldened there because something is supposed to come here, right? Figure out what that is and confirm whether it actually appears. Souwan ni shibaraku ite wa uchi yaburi. In a grass hut for just a little while and then off again. No Season. Number 30 is also No Season by Kyōdai. Inochi ureshiki senju no sata. Senju no sata. Inochi ureshiki senju no sata. What a joy to be alive when poems are being chosen. Okay. So this takes what is implicit in verse 29, namely the figure of the hermit, right, in a grass hut, which is kind of a classical image, right, that evokes memories of the monk Saigyo and so forth, right? So Kyōdai takes what is implicit in verse 29 and makes it explicit in 30 and transplants the setting back to the classical period when poet monks would look forward to having their poems published in the imperial anthologies. Okay, so that's the end of the front side of sheet 2. Now we have the back side of sheet 2 called the Nagori no Ura. Okay, so verse 31. These are the final 6 verses that make up the Q section. So we started in the Jo, went through Ha 1 and Ha 2, and now we're in the final rapid climactic section of the Kasen, the final 6 verses. The first is by Boncho. This is also possibly a love theme. The love theme can appear in verse 31. Figure out whether it appears here. Obviously it does. Actually, Koi Motif is included here. 31. No Season by Boncho. Samazama ni shinakawari koi o shite. In countless ways I've known the vagaries of being in love. Okay, so an old poet is recalling past loves here. And Matsuo芭蕉takes this love theme of 31 and sort of darkens it in the next in verse 32, writing the following in a no season or a miscellaneous verse. Ukiyo no hate wa mina komachi nari. In this floating world of ours, so ukiyo, right? You should know this Japanese word if you don't already. Ukiyo is the floating world. Originally it meant the sad world. It was a Buddhist term written with a different kanji. And in the Edo period, they took that word and sort of lightened it into the floating world of ours, which is kind of a central image or central image in a lot of the culture of the Edo period. In this floating world of ours, all must meet komachi's end. All right, in order to understand the joke, well, it's not really a joke, but in order to understand the reference, you will need to look up Ono no Komachi. It's one of the major Heian period poets. Okay, And Komachi ended her life in a very wasted and depressed and lonesome state. And she was once a very beautiful woman. She ends up in a very ugly state in her final years. And Matsuo Bashō is alluding to that here. Number 33. Kyodai writes the following no-season verse. Nani yuezo, kayu susuru ni mo namida gumi. Okay. I'll read it once more. Nani yuezo, kayu susuru ni mo namida gumi. What can it be to bring the tears on so, just sipping gruel? Okay, so here Kyodai takes what is implicit in the previous poem and shifts the setting to someone who is consoling an aging friend. So Komachi becomes simply a friend here. The aging, dying, lonely, depressed Ono no Komachi from the Heian period becomes a contemporary figure, an old person, an old friend of the poet who is dying, and the poet is consoling that person. Number 34. Boncho orosu to nareba, hidoki itajiki. When the master is away, how broad seems the kitchen floor. Okay, so here we see a servant missing his master. So the poet consoling his or her aging friend in the previous poem is shifted to another person, to a servant. Is designated, or it becomes more specific. The context becomes more specific, the setting becomes more specific, namely the setting of a servant who is missing his master. Number 35, Ten no hira ni shirami hawasuru hana no kage. This is a spring poem by Matsuo Bashō. Remember, the penultimate verse of a kasen, verse 35, must include the hana no za. And Matsuo Bashō follows that rule here and puts the hana in his 5-7-5 verse. Ten no hira ni shirami hawasuru hana no kage. Right? On his open palm, he lets a flea crawl about in blossom's shade. Right? So the kitchen floor of the previous verse becomes his open palm here. Right? So he takes a detail from the previous one and finds a kind of analog or similar image and shifts the entire scene and the theme and the setting as the season as well. Right? The previous one was a no-season poem, no-season verse. Here we are in spring, as the rule demands. Right? And then the final verse, the Ageku, verse 36, is by Kyodai. Kasumi ugokanu hiru no nemutasa. With haze not moving at all, ah, what a sleepy noon. Alright, that's the final verse. You can figure out the connection here, the zuke, between this verse and the previous verse, and explain that in your answers to the study guide questions. Alright. Alright, this was an extremely long video. I want to wrap it up as quickly as possible. We're all getting very tired, but let's just go over very briefly the chart. So look at the chart that I have on your study guide, and look at the summer section, because this is today's Ichinaka is a kasen that begins in summer. Okay, so the Hoku, summer. Hoku is the first verse, right? The Wakiku, the second verse, summer. The Daisang, or the third verse, is, according to the normal template, summer, or non-season. It can be either. Figure out which one Ichinaka is. Verse 4 is non-season, in the usual template. Verse 5 is autumn, and it's also the moon, the tsuki no za position. So confirm whether the moon appears in verse 5 of our Ichinaka. Verse number 6 is autumn. Verse number 7 in the standard format is autumn. Verse number 8 in the standard format is non-season, no season. Number 9 is no season. Number 10 is no season with a possible love motif or love theme thrown in there. So look at verse number 10 of our work and figure out if love is included there some form. Number 11, no season with a love theme thrown in there. Number 12 is a winter verse. Number 13, winter with the moon verse, with the moon za, the tsuki no za thrown in there. So confirm that the moon appears in verse 13 of our poem, of our kasen. Number 14, no season. Number 15, no season. Number 16 is a spring verse. Okay, in the spring, when it appears, it always continues. Number 17, spring with a blossom. So this is the hana no za, number 17. Does the hana appear in verse 17 of our kasen? Confirm. Number 18, spring verse. And then we go to the next page, second sheet. Verse number 19 is spring. Verse number 20 is no season. Verse 21, no season, plus a possible love. So do you find any love theme thrown in there in verse 21? Confirm. Number 22, summer with a possible love theme thrown in there. Confirm. Verse 23, summer with love necessarily thrown in there. It must be thrown in there. Make sure that love appears in this verse number 23. Number 24 is no season or winter. It can be either no season or winter with a love theme necessarily thrown in there. So check to see if love appears there. Number 25, no season. 26, no season. 27, no season. 28, autumn. 29, autumn plus the moon. So this is the tsuki no za. Make sure the moon appears in verse 29. Verse 30, autumn. Verse 31, autumn. Verse 32, no season. Verse 33, no season. Verse 34 is spring or no season. So figure out which of those two we see in verse 34. Verse 35, spring with the blossom, with the hana no za, necessarily thrown in there. Okay, so there should be a hana included in this penultimate verse. It's the hana no za. And then finally, the ageku, the final verse of the kasen, verse number 36, is always spring. Okay, regardless of your starting point. So the other kinds of kasen may start from winter, they might start from spring, but they all end up in spring for the final three, at least two, and usually three verses. Alright. So you can review the chart, memorize all these rules and so forth, and figure out the extent to which Matsuo Bashō and his disciples conform to these rules, and figure out where they depart from them. Alright, and at the very end of your study guide I have some commentary by a Japanese scholar about each of the verses from the Hokku to the Ageku, and you can, those who can read Japanese can look and read his commentary on the poems and the background information and all that. Alright, that's the end of this very long video. There's a lot of information here, it's very dense, and I'm not an expert in Heikai Renga of the Edo period, but I've read a substantial amount about it. So if you have any questions about this work, the study guide, or Heikai literature in general, or Matsuo Bashō in general, send me an email. That is all for now. Goodbye.